Really great to have you guys here. My name is Dan Rennie. I run a little company called Clear that helps technology businesses be more fun and better and more effective and more profitable with marketing and sales, especially marketing. And, we've been running this little show, the Electric B2B show, for quite some time. This is the fourth episode that we're doing it live because we realized that it's actually more entertaining, more fun, more engaging, and better for everybody when it's live. So I'd like to welcome everybody who's here for the first time. I'd like to welcome Ahmad, who's here for the fourth time, 4 out of 4. Awesome. Great to have you here.
He's a local.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm sitting here in Budapest, Hungary. Ricardo is checking in from Dubai, if I'm not mistaken. So you're pretty close to Ahmad, who is, I think you're in Jordan, right?
Yeah, I'm in Jordan.
Yeah, we didn't hear you because it broke up. Okay.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was born in Dubai, so I'm close to Dubai, and I was born in Dubai and have lived most of my time, most of my life there in Dubai. Anyway, I know very well. So welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Right.
Marhaba. I don't know if he knows Arabic. Marhaba or salam alaikum.
Salam alaikum. Malaikum salam.
Yeah, even I know that. Okay. So everybody, again, if you want to drop in the chat your location, I'd be super interested because I love travel. And whenever I meet people online, I'm like always interested in where are you? Is it a place that I've been to? So if you want to share your location, feel free to drop in the chat where you're checking in from. And in the meantime, Ricardo, please, there's like so much to say about you, so I'm not even going to attempt to summarize it. I'm just going to let you do it. So who are you, my friend?
Good morning, good afternoon for some people, I guess. So I'm Ricardo. I was born in Belgium, half Mexican, basically. So if you want to speak Spanish, I'll speak Spanish a little bit better than, my Arabic, because that kind of sucks still at this moment. But I think I always start with the fact that I launched my first company when I was 20. It was a completely not B2B marketing, but it was a coffee bar back in the days. I was 20 back then, and I was like, you know what? Screw school. I'm going to go for it. I'm just going to try something, basically. And I guess that's where I learned the essentials of marketing, because we grew that company when I was 20 to 600K per year with a few employees, just being 20. And this is where I basically learned the fundamentals of marketing. And then I didn't know anything about digital marketing. I didn't study digital marketing. I had an economics background. But then I went back to school and I said, hey, you know what? I want to learn this digital marketing thing. Why don't I just launch a product? Let's graduate with that product and learn the basics. So I learned myself how to code, how to install pixels, how to run campaigns. So I always say I come from a very...
You became a full stack marketer / business person.
That was my goal. I read something about growth marketing and they had a T shape, and I was like, I want to try the whole T. And then I realized you cannot do the full T. But back in the days, it was a very nice dream to get to, basically. And then a few years later, because I was trying to do this marketing for my own, and I was launching companies, and then suddenly some people are like, hey, could you try this for me? And I'm like, yeah, I'm getting paid for this. And like, lovely. Some people I want to pay for my marketing services. I didn't know it was called marketing services back then. And that kind of grew into an agency. We sold that a few years ago, and then joined a company called Uptrust, which we grew then from 10 to 110 people in the last 2 years. So that was an exciting journey. And then I said, okay, now 110 people, that's more than enough. I'm out. So now I'm back into launching software companies. That was really my goal, basically. And I'll be talking about a few of these things today.
Great. This is awesome. Okay, so everybody, today we're going to focus our conversation on outbound and outbound marketing. And when you're in B2B, outbound usually blends with sales. I would advise you not to really get caught up with the distinction, like where does sales start and where does marketing end. I don't think it's that important as it relates to our conversation. But I just wanted to know, for everybody on the call, do you have more experience with so-called inbound marketing, which is more about creating content, generating demand, putting out videos and all sorts of content? Or do you have more experience either on the sales or marketing side with outbound, where you push, you do campaigns, and you do nurture sequences and you push, push, push. I love both, by the way, but I just wanted to know, like, if you're in this call, what have you been focusing on? Because this is really going to set the tone of our conversation with Ricardo here. So just so we know a little bit about your background. So if you're more into inbound, put inbound. If you're more into outbound, put outbound. If neither, put neither. If both, put both. I think I've covered every possibility. Or if you don't want to answer, say put secret. Okay. All right. So Ricardo, in the meantime, like, there is so much on the internet and LinkedIn about outbound marketing, and I see a lot of misconceptions. And you've been really heavy in the outbound business for a while. Like, what are some of the common misconceptions, mistakes, or just false attitudes that have given it a bad name? Because it does have a bad name in some circles. Like, let's face it. So what is it that gives outbound a bad name?
I would start with a little bit of the myths, basically. I think the good thing about, having worked in an agency, basically, is that we got to see a lot of businesses from the inside out, basically. Just having a look, like, how are they growing? What's the challenges and all of the fun stuff. I think in the past 2 years, I was fortunate enough to look at 100 models, like 100 companies, all the way to 200 companies, where I could just look at how are they growing? What are they doing? What are they doing differently? What do they suck at, basically? And I think one of the first lessons, because my first B2B SaaS client was called TravelPerk. TravelPerk back in the days, and still, well, before COVID, was one of the biggest B2B SaaS companies in the entire Europe, basically. And what I've learned there is the first fact is that you cannot just rely on inbound as a full source of just growing a company. There needs to be a point either where you start with outbound and then get into inbound, or you do inbound and then you start into outbound. So there's definitely this misconceptions where I would say the first misconception is that people just rely on inbound and that's all they do, basically. Like, I think HubSpot is the best preacher on this, like inbound first, but then they realize there needs to be some outbound as well to come into certain accounts, to reach certain targets, basically. And we see this over and over again. Is like, should we go inbound or outbound? And I would say you need both, because you're going to hit some ceilings with inbound, and inbound just takes also a little bit longer time. So you need to start with both, basically. So I think that's
you just do outbound only. Can you just do outbound only? Is that an option?
I feel no. Like, you could start with outbound, but you see everybody that starts with outbound always ends up doing inbound as well. And the people doing inbound, they realize, damn, there's not a lot of search volume. There's not a lot of ad space I can buy, basically. So I need to grow even further. So I need to do outbound, basically. So there's always one or the other that starts, but then you always end up doing both, basically. And I also feel the best companies that do outbound also do inbound, basically, because you kind of need, you need a case study when you're going to do outbound, because you need to know how are you helping your customers? And if you do outbound, they're going to ask you, okay, do you have some case studies, basically? So that is inbound as well. That's content. So I kind of feel that you need both in order to succeed in one or the other, basically.
Yeah. And in fact, you have these poster child companies whom you may think that they are like really putting all of their eggs in the inbound basket. But as a prospect to some of these companies, I realized that they have a really well-established sales process as well. Okay. So even like they might be preaching, like marketing companies, and I don't want to mention names here, but they might be preaching like, oh, like, no, you don't even need sales. Like marketing is going to take care of everything. Inbound is like, people are just going to love you and come flocking to you. And then when you're a prospect of theirs, like, there's a sales guy who calls you up and he follows up. And then, he very gently reminds you again and again and again and again until you buy, or until you say, get out of here. So like, even those companies, maybe they don't have like specific outbound sequences, but they do employ sales power.
Even for our agency, when we grew from 10 to 110, we didn't rely just on inbound. We had an inbound engine coming in. We had ad spend, we had an academy, basically. But even for like the higher companies, like the corporates of this world, the chances that somebody's going to land on the landing page and go through your perfect funnel, which you envisioned, is just not going to happen, basically. So you need some kind of outbound person that is going to help you nurture that, they need to speak to a person one day basically. So, and that's mostly not the marketing people. It's mostly the sales people basically.
Yeah. Okay, going on, what are some other myths or misconceptions?
I think that's going to be against my shop because we develop outbound software basically. But the second one is that people think it's all about the software basically, and I feel it's not the case. Like, software is just a very small part of like the entire thing basically. We see so many people walking into our software saying, wow, there is so much software, you can scrape data, you can find the data, you can send people, and everybody's like, ooh, and then they realize, wow, we don't even have the basics basically. What's the market segment we're going after? What's the geography? What's the needs of each person that we're talking to basically? And all of these things, and suddenly you realize, has nothing to do with software, but has to do with the fundamentals of how you're approaching your strategy and what's the playbook basically that you're going to play out. It's something we'll be discussing a little bit later, but I love to talk it when it comes to playbooks. Like, what's your playbook? What's your strategy when going to market? And software is a very small thing around that. Like, I don't even care about the software. It's really about the structure and the way you approach it. And then whatever software is going to send an email is going to suit your needs, even if it's like AI driven and you see all these fancy names coming by, and then they don't even know how to write copy. It's like, well, it doesn't really matter which email you're going to send because you don't even write the right copy basically.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. On the one hand, like, I'm a marketer and software are my toys, in the sense that, like, they're shiny and I get a dopamine hit when I see a dashboard, and then I go in there a day later and then I see new numbers, and like, that gives me a much higher dopamine hit than social media for most people. But I love shiny marketing toys, and I could spend all day just like, testing software and plugging them together and trying and launching stuff through them. But I have to restrain myself. And so we always tell our clients, okay, guys, it's strategy first, because some of our clients are like that also. They're like, oh man, we got this thing, like, we got Expandy, let's launch a campaign. I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Okay, like, what do you want to do? Who do you want to talk to? What are you going to say? What's the sequence? And and they're just like so anxious. It's like when you get a new car and you want to drive it. And it's the same thing. So I get the feeling, but you have to resist the urge, the temptation.
It's the same thing. Like, we see, like, so many companies, they buy the new fancy tool, HubSpot, Salesforce, Pardot, and then you look at Pardot or you look in the tool and you're like, wow, that's not even 10% set up. They have like a super big fancy account and you're like, you're not even using it properly basically. And that's with most accounts, to be honest. Like, they buy this fancy software thinking that's going to solve their needs, which in fact is never the case basically. It is good for reporting then, but you still need to use it basically.
Yeah, it's good for reporting if you have the data set up right and your data is clean that's going into it.
Which is almost never the case, by the way.
Yeah, it's only never the case. Yeah. Okay, I'm curious, everybody, what are some of the tools you are using? Like, I'd love to see, just to give us context. So if you use outbound tools like Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, or Expandy, or anything else, or if you're using more than one tool, then feel free to share it and drop in the name of your favorite tool. I'd love to see like where everybody stands with this. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask you, like, when it comes to tools, yes, you are a strategy first person, but what do you think today? An average, if you can say such a thing, an average B2B technology company, like, how many tools do they need to do advanced outbound marketing? And you can put inbound in there as well. So you'll definitely have a CRM. You'll probably have Sales Navigator. What would you say is the minimum viable tech stack for, we can group it together both into inbound and outbound?
Sure. So I think I'll just give you our tech stack, because I mean, we use a tech stack for our own software company. So I think the first one we have is, what we mostly see is that most people still use inbound tools to do outbound marketing. So an example is basically using a MailChimp to send outbound sequences. MailChimp was never designed to do outbound sequences, basically. Like, I still remember.
What's wrong with using MailChimp though? So what's the problem with that?
Well, I still remember my first upload into MailChimp is the fact that you would upload a database and MailChimp would give you notifications saying, are you sure these are the contacts that you know? Are you very sure about this? And they would even block your account certain times because you were importing too many things. Technically speaking, like you could send outbound sequences with MailChimp, but it's just not really designed for it, basically. If you want to do a multi-touch approach, if you want to have like a CRM with figuring out who clicked on your email, or having like a lead scoring model basically based on the interaction on your website and all that stuff, like it's just not built for it. Basically, it's built to have like pop-ups on their website, do spinning wheels, put people in a newsletter and sending into sequences. It was built for inbound. Same with ActiveCampaign. It was really built for inbound marketing. It was not built for outbound marketing, basically. So we see a lot of people using inbound tools for outbound marketing. So for us, we have inbound tools. So we have an inbound marketing automation, even for us doing outbound marketing. We have an inbound tool called Autopilot, now called Orto. So that's our inbound stack, basically. So the moment you start a trial, the moment you download an ebook, whatever it is, you get into Autopilot. We don't even use our own software for that because we're really outbound focused. So that is basically for us our marketing automation inbound tool stack, basically. And then we have basically our, anything that has to do with outbound. We use our own tool, of course, Halent, for outbound marketing. So that is like the two stacks we have for email marketing and outbound sequences, inbound sequences. Then, of course, you have support. So we have Help Scout as a support system or a chats function, or if they have like FAQs or they have questions or they want to get some support. We have Help Scout, which is connected with our ecosystem. Calendly, of course, in order to get the demos, and we have some copy reviews every week. So that's what we use for Calendly, and all is connected with our CDP. So that's basically Orto or Autopilot. That's all where it centralizes, basically. So if you sign up, if you do a demo, it's all centralized into that topic. Or if we do an outbound sequence, it's just connected into that system, basically. So I think that's what you call a CRM, basically.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what is your CRM? Does Autopilot or Orto?
That's Autopilot,
that role?
so
and it does.
All centralized in that, basically. So the outbound sequences is centralized in our Halent, and then all the rest gets bumped into our Autopilot. So that's our tech stack so far. And of course, Zapier, if you want to do some fancy stuff or some updates on our CRM, that's what we use, to connect the tools, basically.
Okay. What about IP identification software?
So I used to run a lot of ads for Albacross, which is one of the largest IP identifier services. You have Lead Feeder as well. Of course, you have Zoom Info, Clearbit, basically. I've used all of these tools. I think a lot of people, they have fun with it, but they actually don't know how to use it, basically. I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to IP identifier services. They're like, it's fancy, it's nice. The idea of it is amazing, but then they don't know how to use it, basically. So I think we're getting to a part where we're going to be able to use it. And now a lot of smart marketers are building flows. Even yesterday, I jumped on a call with Albacross. They're now in beta with LinkedIn, basically, where they can actually identify companies and send that data back to LinkedIn to build audiences, basically, and dynamically
LinkedIn ads.
So that's something that's really cool. So now we're getting to the phase where we're understanding that IP identifier services is just one thing, but you still need to act upon it. And now I think we're getting into that stage where we're now connecting the dots, basically. So it's definitely going to be huge because intent data is going to be the future, but most marketers weren't able to use it, or it was too expensive to use, basically.
And so you're seeing change in that?
I'm definitely seeing change in that. I mean, we need to get to a stage where intent data is being used into our marketing stack, basically. But, back in the days, it wasn't, or it was too expensive. And I think now we're getting to a point where everybody will be able to use it, basically.
Awesome. Okay. And see how we started talking about how technology comes second after strategy. And then we dove head first into technology and tech stack before even talking about strategy. But that just shows you how we're crazy about this stuff. But it's still not as important as what we came here today for, which is Ricardo, you want to teach us some Outbound? Let me be more specific than that, okay? So we're all fans of Playbooks. So Playbooks are awesome for anything in business or in life. and knowing that what you want to achieve as a growth person, as a sales or a marketing person, has probably been done before at least once on a very high level with very good results, but more likely 37,000 times. So it doesn't really make sense to reinvent the wheel. What makes sense is to find the person or organization or whoever who has done it with proof, what you want to be achieving and the way that you want to go. They have climbed the same mountain before. Of course, the weather was different and their gear was different, but they've climbed the same mountain and get their advice and get their playbook. And the only reason I invited you to this conversation is because you have this really killer framework of which you have showed me a sneak peek. And so do you want to maybe just talk about how you approach Outbound and the whole shebang? And if
I guess I have to say yes now, right? So
yeah, you have to. Otherwise, you would just kill this conversation.
Moving on now. Okay. Can I share my screen? I guess so, right?
I think you can, but if you can't, Zoli's going to make you be able to share your screen.
I think that's going to work out. I'm just going to see if
I
can move this around. So I got a mirror board for you guys all. I'm just going to make sure that we can all just see Dan in the corner. Amazing. And so what I wanted to bring to you today is because we always say strategy first, then tool stack, basically. Even if we sell outbound software, like you're nothing with our software without having a decent strategy. Otherwise, you just end up shooting a million emails and hoping for the best, basically. So we figured out, why don't we use what we always do for ourselves, build frameworks, build models around it, and then share that with the world, basically. And so we thought about what are like the 10 things that you have to have in place, or you need to have thought about when doing outbound marketing, basically. What is the things that you have to have in place, or at least thought about, basically? And we put it into 10 different categories. I'm just going to walk you through, and I know it's small, so I'm going to walk you through each of them so you know what to expect. I'll also be sharing this model after this call. So if you just want to do it yourself, have some fun with it, I think it's all yours, basically. So I think the first thing that we first need to understand is basically the business objectives. And I know it sounds weird, but I see so many people doing outbound marketing for like tools that are like €9 per month, basically. And you're like, well, how are you going to sustain yourself if you're going to, put in SDR salespeople for like a €9 per month CRM? Basically, that's just not going to work out. You need to think about what's the business model. And sometimes in software companies or any other companies, you'll have, for the smaller segments, you're going to have just inbound marketing. But then if you want to go after like the large whales of this world, you want to put the outbound on that perspective, basically, and you try to divide it into those buckets, basically. So I think the first thing that we always try to align on is what's the busin's objectives, what you want to do, how's the business model in place. And from there, once you have the business model, you need to alignment on the metrics and the definitions. I think that's a really important one, because I just came out of I used to have clients, and it took us 3 months to align on what an MQL means, basically. What is a marketing qualified lead? And then 1 year later, they came back and said, yeah, you know what? We really want to add the company name to it. And if you don't have the company name, it's not an MQL, basically. So the whole model changed because somebody decided, you know what? We forgot a field a year ago, basically. So what I always say is try and figure out, once you know the business objectives, is like, okay, you have this funnel of MQL, SQL opportunity, one loss, basically. How do you define those, basically? And make sure that with your team, you understand what is an MQL definition. And I replied to this in a LinkedIn comment yesterday, I think, where somebody said, yeah, an MQL is basically, if you scrape the database, that's an MQL. And I'm like, that's definitely not the same. Like, they haven't even heard about you. How can you call them a marketing qualified lead, basically? Because maybe you put some criteria on it. No. You need to be in a conversation with them and at least have a conversation around, the fields that you want to have filled in, or at least the stage that you want to have in. So that's something really important as well, because your whole business is going to grow on how you define them. Because just to give you an example, we were gathering, I think, around 20,000 MQLs per year, basically, for this company. And then suddenly when the definition changed, we got to about 10% of that. So making those definitions alignment before you actually start your outbound marketing, I think, is key for you to understand what is going to happen and how you're going to grow, basically. Of course, The third one is the budget and the people. That's quite, obvious. Basically, you think about what's the yearly budget, how are you going to spend it? But I think one thing that I always try to put into is that think about your seasonality, basically, because a lot of companies don't think about seasonality when they do budgeting, because they just say, okay, we're just going to split it equal Q1, Q2, Q3. But most businesses are pretty seasonal when it comes to doing marketing. So I'm trying to always say, put your budgets where the season is happening, so you know how to grow and how much budget you're going to put into that. Then you move into the market segmentation. I think that's the most crucial ones, because we, of course, have daily people coming in using Halent. And we always try to get to, okay, have you figured this one out? And what we see is most of the time they haven't figured out the right market segmentations. What is that basically? So thinking about which firmographics you're going after, which countries are you focusing on first, which regions do you want to go first, but also how are you going to segment your market? Is it by company size? Like, do you care about 10 to 50 employees, or you're like, I don't really care. It really cares about the industry, which technology they use, or what's the revenue model that they have, basically. And once you have your market segmentation, let's say by company size, most of the time you also want to put some sub-segments basically on it. Like, think about, I'm just going to call agencies as an industry, basically. That's your market segment. But then within agencies, you have very different agencies. You have branding agencies, you have performance agencies, you have agencies that create websites, basically. So based on these market segment, you're also going to put some sub-segments, basically. And once you have your sub-segment, it's really time to validate, because most companies don't have like the validated segments they want to go after. And this is where we're going to get into the sprints and the 5-week sprints, which I'm going to show you in a second, basically. But I think it's like the fourth and the most important criteria is to understand which market segments do you want to go after, and where's the potential, basically. Once you have the market segments, you move into your ideal customer profile. So let's take agencies in this example again. So you have your agencies as a market segment. Sub-segment is performance agencies. Within the performance agencies, you need to be able to speak to certain people. It could be the CEO, but if it's a agency of 500 people, you don't want to talk to the CEO probably. You're probably going to speak to a few people below him, because he doesn't make a decision of buying a tool of €9, basically. That's not his decision. He's just going to leave that to somebody else. So you want to figure out what kind of people do I want to reach out to within that specific segment. Once you have that, I'm going to walk you through high level on each step, but if you have some questions along the way, please put it in the chat. If there's some questions coming in, I'll be happy to stop wherever it needs to be happening, basically. The sixth part is basically strategic positioning, is to think about, okay, what's the message you want to put forward? Because we see a lot of people saying, okay, yeah, we sell to salespeople. That's great. It's like, okay, but what's your story? why would they need to speak to you? Why don't they go for some other tool? Or why don't they speak to another agency? Or why don't they speak with another freelancer? Whatever it is, you need to understand what's your unique selling proposition moving forward, basically. You need to understand, okay, compared to my competitors, I know that I'm better at XYZ. For example, at Halent, what we decided when we started is that most tools that want to extract data, that you want to scrape LinkedIn to figure out, to send data or to capture data, basically, you need to pay per price. You need to pay per credit. So if you want to extract 100 people, you're going to pay €100, basically. Just giving an example. At Halent, we decided there's a fixed price. You pay one price per month, which is €89. And you get, if you want to scrape the entire web and get 1 million records, we're going to give you 1 million records, basically. For us, that was the USP going to market, basically, because we're basically saying, hey, if you're using Apollo, for example, you're paying a lot of money. You can just pay $90 and we're going to give you all the records that you want, basically, for a fixed amount of price. Even if you're an agency, 10 people, $90, basically. So that was the USP moving forward when positioning ourselves with Halent, basically. And then, of course, the content. The seventh is, and that's why I said inbound and outbound are very connected, basically. If you do outbound well, you're probably also doing inbound very well, because if you don't have content when reaching out, if you don't have case studies, if you don't have the right ebooks or the right education or the webinars, basically, or these summits that you're organizing, it's going to be quite hard to do outbound, because the only thing you have to sell is, well, nothing. It's basically hoping that people reply to say, hey, I'm actually interested in something that you don't have any information about. So the first thing we always check when doing outbound is to think about what content do I have right now, but also what content needs to be produced. And that's why I always say outbound actually connects with inbound, because you need to understand what type of content that you will need in order to connect with your buyers, basically. And this will come back in the 8th one, which we're going to talk about the playbooks. But I think the misconception when we talk about misconceptions is that for outbound, you don't need to produce any content. I feel that's not true. For outbound, you still need to produce a lot of content. Even if you're getting people on a demo, you'll still need a deck, or you still need like some guidelines in order to convince them that your tool is the right tool or your agency is the right agency. You'll still need some content. Maybe it's not on your website, but you still need some content, basically. So the first thing when we're working with people that doing outbound is to figure out, okay, you have your market segment, agencies, branding agencies, you want to target the CEO within that person. What is your USP? Why would they work with you and not, some firm somewhere in America? And then what content do you have in order to convince that your USP is the right USP, basically? So that's a little bit on the high level.
I gotta stop you right there and just ask, like, this looks like it's really a shitload of work. I mean, any one of these can be like a multi-day session, like creating a content plan. First question is like, how deep do you need to go into each of these? Second question is, who does this in the company? Is it a marketing person who sits down and then presents it to sales and the directors or C-level? Is it a joint effort from the start? What do you recommend? How do you recommend companies go about figuring this out?
Yeah, good question. So, well, technically once you have it, of course, it doesn't change, right? So anything like the business objective, metrics, budget, market segmentation, strategic, that's a one-time thing most of the time. You don't need to figure out a market segment every single time. Once you have it, once it's defined, you know what to go after. The content plan, of course, comes forward from all of these things. It doesn't mean that you have to have everything in place in order to do outbound, right? Basically, but you need to make some educated guess. Like you need to understand at least, okay, what's one customer that I was able to satisfy, and how can I find more of them? Like, if you don't know like all of this, you just look at your CRM and you say, okay, what's the 10 clients that are the most happy with me, and how do I bucket them? They're all agencies and branding agencies. Okay, let's go with branding agencies. Like, you don't need to figure it out. And then the only thing you do is basically set up a call with these people and say, why did you pick us? Why are you so happy with us? And that's your strategic narrative. You're like, okay, we love you because you're so responsive, or you have 24/7 support, or because you have a lot of data that we can extract, or your data quality is super high. And that's, and in one day, you basically have this. You just think about your CRM, look at the 10 best clients, talk to them why they love you, and you use that in your narrative, basically. So you don't need to have all of this put into place before you can reach out, if you just have 1 or 2 clients or 10 clients that are super happy with you, basically. And then, of course, from there, you need to understand how to develop the content. The content is something that you can start without, but you need to understand what you need to develop in the future to improve your outbound game. But that's where I guess you come to the playbooks, basically. And playbooks is something we're going to talk about in a second, is that you'll need to pick a playbook in order to understand what you're going to produce as content and what is still missing, basically. I'll give an example, basically. So let's take the playbook, let's say the co-content playbook. Let's take that one. So co-content playbook is very simple. Not very simple, but it's basically where you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to reach out because I'm writing this amazing blog post about the 10 best branding agencies in Belgium, basically. And I'm going to reach out to a bunch of branding agencies in Belgium and see if they want to be included into the post, basically. You're co-creating content, basically, and you're asking them for a few tips and tricks that, they need to think about for 5 minutes to share with you, basically. You're reaching out in a very nice way. You're basically including them in your next content piece. That's a co-content playbook, basically. Or you're inviting to share, hey, we're looking for 10 trends when it comes to branding, basically. Can you share one trend? You're basically creating content together. So we'll see how we went from agencies, then we went to subsegment branding agencies. We went to the strategic narrative where we said, hey, you know what, we're the best in, because we have 24/7 supports. And now we went to, okay, we're reaching out in order to create content together to get that first touch, in order to, just get acquainted. And ideally what you do is you jump on a call with them and say, hey, can you just share with me in 50 minutes what your trend is about. I'm just going to interview you for 15 minutes, have that conversation. And of course, on the call, you say, hey, by the way, we're also a branding agency that, we can help out. We do X, Y, Z, basically. So that's one playbook, for example. And there's many more playbooks, and I'll share them with you, and we can deep dive a little bit later on each playbook.
Actually, what we found, with this playbook is that, like, once you start asking her questions, it sort of suggests to the other person whom you're interviewing that you deal with this on a daily basis, and then that you have at least part of the answers. So that raises curiosity in them, and that makes things end up so that they will actually be reaching out to you and say, okay, so about these trends and the technology and the market, by the way, like, what's your what's your view on this and that, and can you help us with this and that? And so they turn into an inbound lead that way, or they turn into a lead that way, basically. So even without you having to do anything. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, indeed. That's why we're talking, and it's an open conversation. But indeed, like, there's many of these playbooks, basically. I think the goal is for your company to find the right playbook for your market segment, basically. What works the best, which playbook that you're going to implement. So, for example, we just implemented the online summit for a company here in Belgium, basically, where we basically said, you know what, we want to go after company sizes 20 to 99 in the HR space. So we're going to host a full online summit, basically, which is related to that. So it was about acquisition and retention of new talent, basically. That's what the summit was about. And now that we have all these inbound leads, we're doing an outbound campaign based on all these inbound leads. We scored their model. We had a look at their website. We saw how many vacancies they had open. We saw how many, people were mentioning, for example, extra legal advantages, because that was a thing that they were selling, basically. So we turned inbound into outbound at the same time using an online summit, basically. But then again, you can also just do outbound, where you invite people to your online summit. So there's different ways on approaching it, but depending on your market segments, you're going to use a different playbook, basically. Because, I mean, for example, for a for a big corporate, basically, you can put the podcast playbook, where you say, you know what, we're going to spend an hour with this smart person from this corporate, and we're going to build that relationship along the way, because the deal value is so high. So we are okay with investing, 1 hour of our time just to interview this one person, basically. But if you want to do that for, like, companies that are like just 2 employees, maybe the podcast playbook is too expensive for you to implement. So depending on how you want to approach the market, you're going to use a different playbook, basically.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm really interested in if you could talk a few words about the link building playbook. What's that about? Can you say a few words about point C, which is the link building playbook? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So basically what you're trying to do here is this is an old strategy, basically, where you basically you're building your website, basically, you're building your blog. And what you're trying to do here is that you're trying to build a link to your website. So you're basically reaching out, let's take agencies, for example, again, and say, hey, you wrote a piece about the trends in B2B marketing, basically. We just wrote a piece as well around, the trends in B2B marketing. Want to exchange a link, basically, where you basically exchange links between each other to also have the first content. For example, one of the, I think it was a founder of Mobile Monkey, it was called. So Mobile Monkey, I've been following them for a while now, is Larry Kim. And he reached out and said, hey, you have a lovely piece on your website about growth marketing. Why don't we exchange links, basically? And we just got a first connection. He actually reached out to me, which was nice. But he reached out to me, and we just had a connection. We had a first contact. We know each other now. So in the future, if you want to do business together, we know where to find each other, basically. So the link building is basically like, I'm giving you something, you're going to give me something, and we exchange, basically. And we have the first contact by just exchanging value.
Right. But here, in this case, this is not for getting clients. This is just for, building your reputation and your link authority.
Exactly. But, building a reputation is also reaching out to people, basically. So we have a lot of SEO people also reaching out in order to get some new links to their websites, basically.
Oh, right. Okay. So, wow. So it's not only for client acquisition then, like how we usually think about outbound, but also
exactly
partnerships, for example, link building partnerships.
Yeah, but we also have people reaching out for partnerships, basically, where they say, hey, you know what, we saw that you do X, Y, Z, you have a travel blog. I think one is into selling visas, basically, in Spain. And a client basically is reaching out in order to find partners to put them on their website, link, and get commission on, just selling visas, basically, or just putting a link there in order to get a visa, basically. So we have a lot of clients also just using this as to build their partnership model, basically.
That's awesome. Yeah, because we usually think of building partnerships as like a marketing person gets it, and then, their task is, okay, like Google some companies who would make good partners and then write to them or call them up. And then so it's like a very, very laborious and manual process. But if you put the power of outbound marketing behind this effort, your results are going to be vastly different. Yeah, it's really good. I like it.
Yeah, well, eventually it all comes back to the model, the FOMA model, which we're going to discuss in a second. But in order to improve your campaign, there's 4 things that you need to figure out. And I'll skip a little bit of the next because the other ones are pretty obvious, which are channels and then technology, basically. Who's going to run the technology, who's going to implement. So that's quite straightforward. But when you think about your playbooks, basically, so what you do, you have all your structure in place, you have your playbooks, and then you're going to put them onto a map. We call them the prioritization of your playbooks, basically. And we're going to put them on a map of the value to the user and then the cost that it costs you to execute it, basically. And we just, this is for us as well. We just put it in this way. And we put them into 4 maps, basically. So the first one is when the cost is very high and the value to the user is very low, basically. For example, intent data playbook. Then it's nice because that they are using XYZ technology, but there's no value to the user that this, basically. It's information that which is interesting. But reaching out saying, hey, I know you're using Google Analytics on your website. We also implement Google Analytics. They're like, yeah, that's nice, but yeah, there is no value for me in that sense. So the cost is quite high. But let's take, for example, the co-content playbook, for example, the one we just discussed. So the value to the user is pretty high because you're reaching out in order to create content together, which is useful for them as well, basically. And the cost is pretty okay. Like you just need to have a content writer or just yourself that creates the blog, or you outsource this. We even outsource this to other countries, basically, that just going to run the interview for 10 minutes or just a form where you say, hey, just put your trend in here and we're going to put this on the blog page. And this is a pretty high value for the user and the cost is relatively low, basically. So we think about it we want to at least each quarter do 2 of these quick win playbooks. And then we want to have one once per year, we want to have like, okay, it's going to cost us higher, but the value to the user is higher. For example, organizing a full online summit, for example, like fullfunnel.io, they do this every single 6 months, or I think once per year. It's a huge amount of cost because there's some time that goes into it, but the value to the user is so much higher than just creating a little bit of content together, basically. So how we used to look at this is that per quarter you have one quick win playbook, and then per year you just have one long-term playbook that you're trying to implement. Think about it as an experiment, basically, where you're saying, okay, I'm going to do some small experiments and then just one big experiment that you want to make it work.
Yeah, here's why this is awesome. What I'm realizing now is because if you don't have this framework, if you don't have these priorities in mind, then you're naturally going to gravitate towards quick win playbooks, right? Because everybody needs to hit numbers by the end of the quarter and the end of the year. So you're going to gravitate towards quick win, but you're going to miss out and you're going to deprioritize the stuff that is of strategic importance, like an online summit, for example, like building a community. So it's good to have this framework, the try out, the quick win, and the long term.
Exactly. And I think the goal for each company for Outbound is that they should find 1 or 2 playbooks for each market segment that works for them, basically. And once you have that playbook to run, you can just keep on running it, because a partnership playbook or a podcast invite playbook, I mean, this is something you can scale, basically. You can just say, okay, now I want to have 3 guests or 4 guests or 5 guests, basically. So you just scale that every single time. So it's compounding every single time. And I think the advantages of most playbooks is also that you just have also a lot of inbound content, which you can use for outbound and vice versa. That's why I always say outbound and inbound have to have together. Basically, we need to put these times together. We cannot just think about outbound and inbound as a separate channel, basically.
Right.
And then when we have our playbook, basically, we just map it on the FOMA framework. And this is something we do on every single Friday when we're reviewing copy of our users, basically. We put them against the FOMA framework and we just ask them 4 questions. When you're doing outbound, you need to think about 4 things. The first one is friction, basically. So imagine that you're sending an email and the friction to get the offer, and the offer is, for example, the invitation for a podcast. Let's take that playbook that we're playing. So we want to get people, high value people on our podcast, basically. So the offer is pretty strong. I want to interview, just like today, basically. I want to interview, you want to interview, and you have content, I have content for it. So that's the offer, basically. So the question is, how much friction is there? Do I just need to reply to the email, or do I need to fill in some hefty form that you're going to use in order to qualify if I'm able to join on the webinar or on the podcast, basically? So how big is that friction, basically, in order to take action to get the offer? So most people, for example, when they reach out, they're like, hey, we are XYZ. We do amazing work because our clients say so. And here is the website, basically. And if you want to sign up, here is a demo request that you can book with me, basically. And you're like, well, first of all, the offer sucks because it's a demo request, which is interesting for you, not interesting for me. So the offer already sucks. And then the friction is even higher because they need to fill in a Calendly link, see if there is a booking on the right spot of their time. And it needs to be a really good offer in order for you to start the whole process, basically.
Okay,
so
let me stop you right there because this is huge. Like, I think what really kills B2B marketing usually is the lack of a good offer, because it's just so much harder to get right than in B2C. Because, if you've got an online store, you can just bundle things together, put a coupon on it, and bam, you have an offer that is like somewhat good, at least. Like, so, and it feels like that in B2C, you have a lot of ways to bundle and divide and take things apart and combine them with partner offers and whatnot, which feels a lot harder in B2B. So I was wondering if you have any good examples, either by you or clients or previous clients or anything that comes to mind in the B2B technology space where you sell like, oh man, that offer, that really is killer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of offers, basically, but I mean, most people think about offers when it comes to B2C. If you come from a B2C mindset, you're going to think about, bundling things together, right? Yeah. So there are examples in the B2B, depending on if you're going high ticket or a low ticket, basically. But if you go like low tickets, for example, there's like templates that you could share. For example, this could be saying, hey, you know what? We developed a framework around B2B marketing. If you want, I can share it. Just reply yes or no, basically, or just reply and I'll send it, a mirror link, basically. Very low friction. Offer could be interesting. You do the same thing like you did on LinkedIn. You say you hide a few things and you say, here, there you go. Like, that's a okay offer. It's not the best offer, but it is an okay offer, basically.
Yeah.
But for example, for us, when we reach out, we say, hey, you know what? Just give us a few metrics. We just ask, what's the company size that you want to reach out, which country and which industry you want to have. And we're going to send you 100 leads for free, basically. You just tell us what you kind of need, the company size. Here as well, if you want, you just tell me what's the company, what is the industry, what is the segment. So what's the country and what's the company size of your ideal customers. And I'm going to shoot you over 100 leads that could be relevant for you to reach out to with all the contact details that you want. Yeah. That's a stronger offer, basically, because everybody like, oh, wow, I can get like 100 people in my segment that could be interesting to reach out to. I have all this data and I can reach out tomorrow, basically, with, of course, some additional research that I still need to do, but I will have all the contact details to reach out to, basically. So that's a strong offer when it comes to B2B marketing, because technically you're just getting 100 people that you could reach out tomorrow and do sales to the next day, basically. So that is basically when we think about offering and putting different offers into the market.
Yeah, let me just stop here for a second, Ricardo, because I love geeking out on offers because I know how crucial they are. So here's another example, because you had a great product example for a software product, but I know several of you on this call have consultancies and development companies. And so here's another idea that you can do easily. What you can do is basically take your service or a part of your service and split it up in a way that where you display each piece of your service offering as separate components of an offer. And I'm going to give you an example so that it makes sense. Okay, so a lot of times even if you're a dev company or a consultancy, you offer some sort of onboarding, which they either pay for extra or it's part of your service. And so what you can do is you say, okay, we're going to develop an app for you, for example, and then you know that you have a given onboarding sequence. So what you do is you take like each component of your onboardings. For example, like we sit down with you and we go through your strategy and adjust your strategy so that it will fit the, I don't know, like the use cases that you want to achieve with your app or whatever. Then we go and train your team on exactly like how to deal with our developers as we are creating the solution for you. So we give them training, and on each one of these, you can actually put a price tag. And even if it's, whether it's included free in your offer, or if onboarding is a separate paid for thing, like for $2,000, you can take each one of these things, each one of the components of the onboarding itself, and say, okay, this is a $3,000 value. This is a $2,000 value. And then we have a common workshop with everybody from the C-suite. And then that's a $5,000 value thing. And then you can say that we are bundling this, all these consultation workshops, training and whatnot, and we're now giving it to you for free. You just used to call it onboarding and be done with it. But if you frame it this way, it's just so much more powerful.
Yeah, it's priming, I think. It's when you walk into the store and you're like, oh, that is the usual price, but now now it's just $5 basically. I think a lot of agencies, what they used to do if they were selling SEO, for example, they would have these softwares that would basically run a crawl on their website and basically score already based on the website URL, saying, hey, your website is just scoring 50, you know, we can get it to 80, but normally that's like 9,000 euros. But today we're just going to do it for 9 euros, basically. Would you be interested?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just thinking about like one small thing that you could solve for them on a very quick notice, and just put a high price tag and then put it on the lower price tag.
Yeah. And yeah, one more thing, like I usually, I get caught up on the ethical side of things. So I never want to bullshit and mislead and manipulate customers, because it just doesn't feel right, and it's bad business, and it comes back to haunt you. And so some people, when I tell them this strategy, they're like, oh, but that's sneaky. And I'm like, bullshit. What you're actually doing is you're helping them understand and see the value of what you're offering. You can't just flat out lie about the value. So you can't say that, oh, the 5-minute consultation is worth $10,000, because that's just unrealistic. So you've got to put like realistic price tags on these things. But every time you spend a couple of hours with your client, you can attach a $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,000 per hour value, depending on your business and your market, to an expert spending 3, 4, 5 hours with your client. So you can totally do that and help them understand that, hey, like, okay, we call it onboarding, but what's really going on here is that you have somebody bringing their 25 years of experience, so that you don't have to go through the 25 years in order to get the results that you're going to get with us. So it's really about helping your market, your prospect, your customers see the value of what they're getting.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen to that. No, it's true. I think that's the key takeaway, because I think we have 3 minutes left. If you're doing outbound or any campaign, like this is not just outbound, this is inbound, this is whatever it is. You need to think about your offer. Your offer is going to define how strong your campaign is going to go, basically. If your offer is shit, whatever your message you're going to put out there, it's going to be a crappy campaign. So anything that you do, when you think about, and that's where good marketers come in versus great marketers. Good marketers know how to write copy. Great marketers, they actually work on the offering, because they know that the messaging will come from the offer, basically. So when you leave this call, the only thing I want you to think about the next time you're sending an outbound campaign, what's the offer and how strong is it? If it's not strong, kill it and make it stronger, basically, because all the rest is complete bullshit. Like, that's why a tool is nice. Like, we sell software, but eventually it's not the tool. It's basically the offer, and we're just giving you the tool to connect with that person, but the offer is going to define everything, basically.
Yeah. So like Ahmad wrote, it's about value. It's all about value that has to go in the offer. And when you're communicating your offer in a way that it's like a free demo or a free
Nobody cares about a demo.
You need a free consultation. I mean, like, where's the value in that? Free consultation, like that doesn't speak about value. Okay, and
Exactly.
you have a couple other things here.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we have 1 minute left, so I just wanted to park it there. But I wanted to say that use the FOMA frame. Every time you're writing copy or you're going to run an outbound campaign, think about what's the offer. We call it playbooks then. How strong is it? How much friction is it to get that offer? And how well are you communicated? Because you can sell, we always give the examples of blueberries, basically. Like, if your offer is like buy 1+1 blueberries, that's nice. That's a nice offer. But you can put that message forward in different ways. Because if you talk to me, I'm gonna say, oh, buy blueberries because it makes you go skinny, basically, because you're gonna burn some fat and all that stuff. But for some people, they're gonna say, hey, these blueberries actually, they help you against like pimples, basically, because for people that have a lot of pimples, that would be the value. So you can see that the same product, same offer can be communicated into different ways. And so that's what I want you to test next time. So just build a strong offer and then go into different messaging depending on the persona, basically, because blueberries can be sold in different ways. So can your offer, basically. And then you come to the last part, which is basically audience, but that's straightforward. Like, who are you selling to? And also, like, which data points do you have? Do you have intent data? Do you not have intent data? I think that's an important. But when you look at the 4 things, think about the offer, because the messaging and the friction, the audience is going to pull forward from there, basically. That's where I'll stop with the framework. Basically, I'll be sharing you this afterwards if you want to. I guess the recording will also be there, but I'll be sharing this outbound model coming forwards. And you're basically also going to have a 5-step model, basically, that you can actually see that we're using every single day. This is like a 2 to 3 week sprints that we use in order to leverage outbound campaigns. So I'll be sharing that with you after this call as well.
Awesome. I want to go through this with you, like, separately, because I want you to help us implement this.
I'll share it with you so you'll be able to check it in. Maybe if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer a few questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Here we get
I'll be happy.
Okay, yeah, like Zoli was asking, what did you all think of Ricardo's presentation? The real life examples and the visual aids were cool.
Thank you, Zoli.
Yeah, so feel free to either drop your question in the chat or just come online and ask it as it's more convenient for you. As we mentioned, we're gonna create a content hub and put all the resources there and all the links and everything else in there. And if Ricardo comes up with an offer for Halent, then we're gonna put that in there as well, so you can take it on the test drive. And yeah, otherwise, thank you all so much for coming. This has been, I hope it's at least as educational for you guys as it was for me, because I really took a lot out of this. And next time, we're hoping to have actually Steffo Tiampont, a mutual acquaintance of ours, and
Belgian person.
And Belgian, again.
What's up with these Belgian people?
It's the invasion of Belgians here. And we're going to be talking about numbers and KPIs. So that's the plan for next week. Okay, but we'll give you a heads up on that. And thank you everyone for joining, and have a pleasant afternoon, evening, lunch, wherever you are.
Thank you, Ricardo. Dan, I want to ask you
yeah, go ahead,
one last thing here. Thank you very much for your time, your knowledge. When you're trying to start a new business, it isn't an established business, but you're like trying to start your new startup. You use outbound as an experimentation. You have some kind of framework to fit the first messages, the first offer that you're trying to sell, to experiment, see what happened with this kind of early adopters.
Great question. I love it. Do you want to go first, Ricardo, or should I take it?
What was the question? Sorry.
Yeah, okay. So when you're starting a new company, the way, but correct me, Erica, if I misinterpreted your question, but when you're a startup and you're starting out new, do you go like all in on outbound and use it as a way to run experiments? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
Even
if you
got-
want to go first, happy to have you first. I can definitely reply on that one as well.
My short answer is hell yeah. And obviously I can elaborate on that, but yeah, just, you know, one thought that when you've got a startup, one of the first things that you got to be doing is creating content, especially like if you're in B2B on LinkedIn and wherever, because you can never start too early. Like even before you launch your company, before you have a product, before you have an MVP or any sort of offering, you already want to be out there and building an audience. And then what you want to do is like go out there and hit it with outbound, because, you know, waiting around with inbound is, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work. And yes, you want to be testing your audience, your message, your offer, your USP and everything. So it's all about going out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I would like to add there is that what I would first advise is try to like get 5 organic clients at least, like just through talking to people, maybe your friends, talking to them and saying, you know what, this is what I do. And then because they are going to give you the best advice on what your messaging is and why they like working with you, basically. If you can't name 5 customers that you've helped truly like perfectly, I think you're going to have a hard time like defining what your messaging and offering is going to be, because we call this the voice of the customer. Every time we run an outbound campaign, we try to at least talk to one person saying, okay, why did you pick Halent? Why did you do this, basically? And they're just going to tell you. And that's the thing that you're using in your communication. But on a second note, if you have a little bit of budget, what we always do here at Halent as well, is that we run social media campaigns. So for example, on the extract email, we actually run social media campaigns to test different messaging. And then once we know which messaging is working, we use that in our outbound sequences. So that's something where we try to connect inbound and outbound as well. So we test very low, it's even like €100 budget, €50 budget. We just try to do several messages, and based on that, we basically put that into an outbound sequence. So that's something also that could help you out.
That's so cool. Yeah, people are so afraid to use paid, but you've got to think of paid campaigns as a way of experimentation and a market research and getting answers to questions that would otherwise take a hell of a lot longer. For example, like testing your UVPs and your offer and whatnot. Like what hook is it that gets people? And it's so much faster to just put out some message out there and test it in a paid campaign and get 300 results in a matter of days. And then you'll have the data on what works. You can't always do it, but in most cases you can find a way to leverage paid campaigns for testing and experimentation.